yeah, so maybe I can be a little briefer. Some of my points have been covered by the other speakers in terms of the question we're addressing, what is socialism? Again, we start out that socialism is the only way out of humanity's present crisis, the only alternative to a new dark age of pandemics, fascism, and eventual depopulation. I repeat the little graph that I showed in the first teach-in, showing that this present stage of development comes out of a 40-year decline in the rate of growth of the capitalist economy, turning now into an actual contraction, as measured either by the rate of mortality decline, which has now became a rate of mortality increase, or the rate of use of energy, which has now become a decrease in the use of energy. By any measure, we are turning into a contraction, a retreat of global society under the leadership of capitalism. So what will a socialist program do? We need both emergency and medium-term measures against the pandemic, and these measures require, especially in the medium term, fast transfers of wealth and control from the capitalists. The emergency measures, many of which can be taken under capitalist rule, taking control of the government-funded vaccine production, which, by the way, is what should have been done under American law, and to distribute and vaccinate the entire human population, mobilizing defense industry capacity, which I'll come back to in a second, to increase the production of vaccines and medicines. We need centralized exchange of best practices in fighting COVID and other diseases. We need a wartime mobilization of the physical sciences, as in World War II, for broad-based physical means of fighting bacteria and viruses. For example, we already know that UVC light, which is harmless to human beings, it's stopped even by the tears on our eyeballs, is deadly to almost all microbes. A huge program to make that light affordable and generally available could be a broad-based step against all pandemics. We need eminent domain to seize control of empty hotels to serve as high-quality quarantines. As I say, many of these measures could be taken immediately. They would hurt capitalist income, but could be done under present capitalist rule. But to get out of the period of growing pandemics, to get out of the conditions that lead to pandemics, much more broad-based steps must be taken. We have to complete the process of global urbanization, which is now just about half done, and provide a decent life for all. As other speakers have mentioned, we need a global system for free housing, for the infrastructure that goes with it, to concentrate population away from wildlife that can spread new diseases. We need reforestation, and as Eric van der Venterman, the concentration of agriculture on smaller areas, as has been done already to a certain extent in Europe. We need a vast expansion of free public health throughout the entire world. And this is possible only with a vast expansion of free education to provide the manpower, the people power necessary to staff this great expansion that we're talking about. The only way to get this vast expansion is to mobilize fully the defense industry in the United States, which is the largest defense industry, and in other countries. That is our reserve industrial power with the highest technology industry, which could rapidly overcome the shortages that we are seeing and instead provide hundreds of millions of jobs for people to carry out this program. But this program has to be financed by the destruction of capital. The only source of several $1 trillion a year is to take back the capitalist income and wealth that they have stolen. This also, as other speakers have mentioned, is the cure to inflation, is popping the bubble of the not only real estate, but of the stock market, which leads to inflation. So obviously these steps, taxation of capitalist wealth, and especially the stopping of the entire $120 billion a month for the United States and many hundreds of billions of dollars in the rest of the world, theft of working class incomes to feed directly the holdings of corporate America. Simply stopping this program and selling off immediately the trillions of dollars of corporate holdings would immediately lead to the mass bankruptcy of the entire financial system, and under present laws require the social ownership and control of all finance. Since the financial institutions own outright legally 70% of the top thousands of corporations, that would immediately lead to the socialization, the public ownership of 75% of the economy. What is interesting, I should say, is that much of this program is agreed to by wide parts of the population, and even in the liberal Democrats was quite part of the program of Bernie Sanders, except for the need for taking this money away from the capitalists and selling off, stopping this subsidization. This is something that we as socialists have to popularize among the working class population. Now, the second point is going to be less familiar to probably even this group. Socialism means a fusion-powered economy. What we are talking about requires tripling energy consumption, and that's impossible with fossil fuels. Right now, we're using 14 billion tons of fossil fuels per year, leading to 7 million deaths from fossil fuel air pollution alone, completely excluding effects on the climate. $5 trillion in energy costs, which also are a major driver in inflation, would make impossible the tripling of energy consumption with the present energy sources. And we can get into this more in the question and answer, but solar and wind are far too expensive to use as base energy. We need energy that is denser, in other words, more energy per unit mass, cheaper, cleaner, and safer than fossil fuels. And that the only alternative is fusion energy. Now, what is fusion energy? Fusion energy is the energy that powers the sun, the stars. It's the power that drives the universe. Fusion fuels are 1 million times the energy density of oil. 1 gram of fusion fuel has the energy content of 1 ton of fossil fuel. I am a fusion energy researcher, and I run a small company together with some people who are already present here in Middlesex, New Jersey. We are talking about using a fusion fuel from hydrogen and boron, which is immensely abundant. It can be derived from seawater, and producing decentralized, cheap, compact fusion generators. Helium gas is the only byproduct. There is no radioactive waste. And if developed, we are still in the course of developing these devices, our device would be 10 times cheaper than any existing energy source. Fusion energy would make possible decentralized 5 megawatt generators which could also make possible the total recycling of all waste products using already existing commercialized plasma torch technology, which can reduce any waste back to its useful elements. You can learn a lot more about all this at our company websites, which is cited here. Now, people ask, why don't we have fusion now? People who know a little bit about fusion know people have been working on it for half a century. The main answer is governments have wrongly concentrated on a single hugely costly device called the tokamak. And right now they're building such a tokamak in France. And if you can see this tiny little guy over here, you'll see the gigantic scale of this machine compared with our machine that fits in a small room. We need instead a crash program that funds all possible routes to fusion. And that demand has to become part of a socialist program. Now, thirdly, and again, I'll be brief because other people have referred to it, socialism means democratic, delegated control of society and economy at all levels. Why do we need democracy, not just state ownership? First of all, without democracy, the reestablishment of capitalism is inevitable, as is shown by the historical examples of the Soviet Union and China. When decision makers are separated from workers, that is the basis of class society, and capitalism inevitably reemerges. Second of all, democracy is essential for running an advanced industrial society. Eric van der Venter gave examples of this. The fact is, bureaucratic states can manage the transition from an agricultural to an industrial society. They cannot manage once an industrial society has emerged. It is far too complex for a centralized dictatorial bureaucracy. Finally, democratic movements alone can defeat fascism. Only by giving individuals the real ability to participate in the decisions that a movement makes can we show what real freedom is and educate people against the false promises of a fascist movement. So finally, I want to just briefly say, is China a counterexample? Because here we have an undemocratic capitalist country that seems to be doing fine against the coronavirus and has grown rapidly. Well, the basic fact is the Chinese model is unsustainable because it is based on vast underinvestment in the next generation. The combination of the housing shortage and the one-child policy means that there is going to be a 1% annual decline in the working age population for the next 20 years, and a 2% decline in the childbearing women population. And we know that's because all of these people have already been born. Many aspects of the Chinese economy, for example, the auto industry, have already passed into a stage of decline. The Chinese population itself is in the process of peaking because of an extremely sharp decline in the birth rate, which started well before the pandemic. In fact, pandemic statistics are not included in this chart. So the rate of growth of the population, which used to be quite large, is now approaching or probably has reached zero, and the Chinese population has probably started to contract. This method of running society is not the fastest route of development. Here is a graph showing the number of years that separates life expectancy in China, the blue line, from life expectancy in Japan, which still has the longest life expectancy in the world. And you'll see over the 40-year period of capitalist development in China under dictatorial regimes, the gap between the Chinese and Japanese life expectancy has decreased by only about a year and a half. In South Korea, a capitalist state with an extremely vibrant and militant labor movement, which has introduced elements of working class democracy into that capitalist state, the gap between the life expectancy, which is the orange line, has declined rapidly, and the gap is almost closed, even though South Korea in 1980 was at the same level of development as China. What does delegated democracy really mean? There's a long discussion, but in brief, the Paris Commune was the first example. The Soviets during the Russian Revolution, strike committees and mass strikes worldwide during the 20th and 21st century. It means that delegates are elected only for specific meetings at higher levels, that they report back continuously to lower assemblies, that they receive mandates on how to vote on certain issues from those lower assemblies. In the 20th and 21st century, geographically organized, like citywide strike committees and workplace committees, both came into existence during mass strikes and worked together. These temporary organizations arising out of mass strikes must become continuously existing organizations, the basis of a socialist movement initially, and eventually the basis of a government. For this sort of society to work, there is a necessity, as Eric mentioned, for a vast reduction in the work week, which is possible at present levels of productivity, to allow time for governance, merging the role of workers and decision makers. We saw in the impact of the shutdowns how workers, when allowed time to think, drew different conclusions about their own power, about their own futures. This has to be part of day-to-day existence, and that means a vast reduction in the work week. Democracy obviously can only be democracy for all. As Jay mentioned, that means a fight for equal rights for all, especially, as we see with the present Supreme Court, to fight against those attacks on equal rights under the cover of imposing religious beliefs. Only a growing mass strike movement can defend the rights of immigrants, of women, and of other scapegoated groups. We cannot rely on the courts, on the government. As Jay says, we have to rely on movements that can become the government. So to summarize, socialism is a survival program to transfer resources from capitalists to the entire world population, to solve the economic threats that we face, which are the basis of the deadly pandemic threats we face, and to complete the job of global urbanization. Socialism must involve a rapid transition from fossil fuel to fusion energy-based economy. And socialism must be delegated democratic control of society at all levels, with equal rights for all within the movement. This is the only way to defeat fascism and to transform the working class itself, to become a school for the knowledge that the working class needs to run society. As Marx said, this revolution is necessary, therefore, not only because the ruling class cannot be overthrown in any other way, but also because the class overthrowing it can only, in a revolution, and means in a mass strike process, succeed in ridding itself of all the muck of ages, which we see so much today, and become fitted to found society anew. Thank you very much, and let's let the discussion begin.